Let's talk about complexity. It's no secret that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game is a very complex game to not just play, but to just get into and keep up with. This has been a topic of conversation in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Space for quite some time now, but it's been a conversation that's been really increasing lately. And even for those on the outside looking in, they could tell you the same thing. But the argument can be made of, well, you don't know until you try it. But I don't know if that's the case here. Some time ago recently, Konami had their annual shareholders meeting and they actually addressed and touched on the subject of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this very thing. They touched on how they're a little concerned that the game just isn't gaining and retaining a lot of new users from Master Duel, and this is a pretty big deal. I have the translated conversation with me, so let's break it down. So, the Konami statement reads as follows. Regarding Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, I am concerned that two things may have a negative impact on growth. The first is that we have not been able to successfully acquire new users. New users who started with Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel also started on Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Duel Monsters. This is essentially just the trading card game for both TCG and OCG. Due to differences in the environment, etc., the know-how of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel cannot be used for some reason and they may quit. I actually met a player at the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Duel Monsters tournament recently, and this was the case for them. Isn't it necessary to consider how to eliminate such cases? This is in regards to OCG rules and live streams. The second point is the poor appearance of the competition match video distribution. Judging from player and online opinions, streaming of official Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments is one-sided. This often leads to a decrease in player motivation and new users to play Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Duel Monsters. Again, this is the TCG and OCG. I think it's connected to the difficulty of surrendering. Surrendering is not currently permitted by the official rules. If surrendering is recognized, it will create a strategy to restart from the next game, and the game may be more interesting to watch. Please consider it. Okay, so this is quite a bit to unpack here, so let's break it down a bit. Let's start with the issue of Master Duel and then transition to the actual card game. The first bit of the statement is addressing how Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel just does not do a great job of converting people over to the actual card game, and we can get into exactly why this is and what I think it could be. I've always been a huge fan of Master Duel as a game. I think it's exactly what was needed for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community at the time that it came out. An official card sim from Konami themselves. But even so, I still think there's so many things that it could do better, and I've been pretty vocal about it a lot on stream as well as on here in past videos. Way back when the game first came out, I stated in a previous video that the main complaints that people had of Master Duel, about how long turns can take, about sitting there and just being comboed for ages, isn't necessarily a negative of Master Duel per se, but it's a reflection on the game as a whole. This is what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been for a very, very long time, and Master Duel just helped to expose and break the issue wide open. Well, this is definitely one thing, but the next thing is probably the biggest reason why Master Duel fails to convert, and that's the format. As great a game as Master Duel is, having a different format completely separate from the TCG is something that just doesn't do it much good. Master Duel format is literally its own thing, and that can make it especially hard when you're trying to move someone over from the digital end to the physical side. This is primarily because of the ban list and how it's handled. Master Duel ban lists are handled a lot differently in that they're a lot more spontaneous than the TCG, which releases in no less than a few months. This is a topic that I wanted to touch on too in a previous video that I made talking about the differences of digital TCGs versus physical TCGs, but referring specifically to Yu-Gi-Oh! Here. Certain decks and strategies don't work the same way in Master Duel as they would in the TCG. Master Duel's ban list is also very weird, which can allow for a lot more degeneracy. When the game launched, you were seeing some of the worst strategies at play. Stuff like Rongo Miniad, VFD, and Full Power Drytron were all on the table and available for anyone to play. You were seeing anything and everything at play here. Again, this is just the natural course when you leave it so open-ended. Of course, let people play how they want and all of that, but for most, this was all just another reason as to why modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Sucks. To continue beside this, due to the format of the game and it being only a best of one format, your strategy may have to change and adapt quite a lot because now you're taking things like Max C into account. And yes, the single card does drastically alter the game pretty much single-handedly, whether you want to admit it or not. And while I'm not here to debate the politics of whether Max C should be banned or not, I think that's a whole other separate video on its own. It would be ignorant of me to say that this card doesn't matter, because it does. a lot. For people who are already players of the TCG, you may have to shift up your deck a little to adjust and adapt to the possibility of seeing that card in your next duel, which is more than likely. And for people who started with Master Duel and are looking to transition into the TCG, you also have to switch it up now because it's a different playing field. The main point that's being made in the above statement is pretty much saying that the beginners of Yu-Gi-Oh! That start with mainly Master Duel are still very often confused and just overwhelmed by the sheer amount of extra things and rules that they now have to keep up with, and I'll get to that in a sec. So for it to have an almost completely different reflection of what playing paper Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually is, I can see how it would lead to some problems. Okay, so these are some of the main issues with Master Duel on its own. We'll come back and touch on this again soon, but for now, let's switch gears a little and talk about the TCG a bit. One of the other issues that was raised in the statement above was how the game can be presented in live streams and official events. We mentioned above how Master Duel is just a reflection of what's going on in the TCG, and this is a big thing in the TCG. Now, I'm willing to bet that a lot of people that play the English TCG have had the experience of sitting there through your opponent's turn as they just combo you for minutes and minutes, and you just have to sit through it if you want a chance to play the game yourself. It can be frustrating at times, but the benefit that we have over here in the English TCG is that you can scoop at any time if you don't want to sit through all of that. In the OCG, surrendering is not an option. You just have to take it. Sitting there for minutes, watching someone go crazy and just set up their board or combo you for days just isn't very fun, and it doesn't make for a very fun viewing experience either. And that's what the above statement is getting at. If the game is clearly in a state where the other player has already lost, then why bother continuing? So essentially, the game isn't the most accessible, and it doesn't allow for as easier transition from digital to physical, and it just isn't fun as a viewer's experience. So what was the response to all of this then? Let's go over it real quick. Thank you very much for your valuable opinion. I found it extremely regrettable that players who had started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, note that this implies both OCG and TCG, were not able to do so for long. We have been revising the Forbidden and Limited list as well as changing the rules over a certain period of time. Regarding your opinion about our inability to attract new users, we take that feedback very seriously. As such, we will continue to review the rules, including tournament rules, to make sure more customers can enjoy the game. We will continue to focus on playing environments that will allow more players to enjoy the game for a longer period of time. In addition, not only do we want Yu-Gi-Oh! To be more enjoyable to play, but there is also that valuable perspective that enjoyable to watch is a very important subject that has been relevant for several years. I think your opinion is absolutely correct, and I will convey it to our company to make the proper considerations for the next live stream. This year, World Championships will be held in Japan for the first time in 4 years, which we recently just had. We also have plans of live streaming it. As such, I hope you will look forward to it. So this is a lot here, but I think it's a good response. It sounds like Konami themselves are very well aware of a lot of the issues surrounding the game right now in terms of both accessibility and user experience. It's great to hear that they will be taking steps to advance the game in a positive way. So, all of this to say that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very complicated game. For a lot of new players, it can be pretty overwhelming for the first timer, and for a lot of people on the outside looking in, it can be very daunting. And heck, even to the long-time players, it can get to a point where it feels like it's just not fun anymore. I know I've definitely had those experiences many times before. But what is it that makes it so daunting and sometimes scary? Well, it's a range of things, but if you were to ask me what's the single thing that makes the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG so complicated, it's the rule set. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a very unique rule set, I would say. Compared to other games, the rules of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG aren't so easy to follow sometimes. On the surface, they're actually quite simple. The basic rules of the game are very easy to follow and understand. In every Yu-Gi-Oh! Starter deck and structure deck, you always have a little rulebook to teach you how to play the game if you're new or recent. This little rulebook has been updated a few times over the years to keep up with how the game has changed in various ways, and always teaches you the most up-to-date summoning mechanic and rulings. However, the rulebook book doesn't list everything, and that's where it can get a little tricky. There are so many unspoken rules in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That are part of the game, yes, but aren't explained formally by Konami, so you kinda just have to pick it up as you go. I'm talking about things like chain blocking, spell speeds, open and close game states, and if versus when effects are all things that the new player kinda has to sit down and really learn once they're introduced to the real world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of their beginner deck. I know it's a massive meme that there really is too much reading in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this extends to the rulings as well. I can sort of sympathize with people that look at the game and say, oh hell no, that looks way too weird. When I first started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Many years ago, it was in the GX era where I would just play the game to the bare basics without having learned any of these extra things that I just listed. And while a lot will say that it was simpler back then, it was still a lot that you had to take in. I wouldn't sit down and get to learning the game properly and all of its rulings and such until the 5Ds era and onwards into the Arc 5 era, where the rules got even more advanced. And with each new summon mechanic introduced, they always carry their own set of unique rulings with how you can and can't interact with them. Pendulums act as spell cards when in the pendulum zone, so you can't attack them regularly when that's the case. Link monsters can switch to defense positions, so they're not affected by position changing cards and mechanics. Additionally, there are so many archetypes and cards in the game that just straight up break the rules and ignore the basic rules that are set in stone. For example, cards that let you synchro or exceed summon on your opponent's turn. That's something that's not technically listed in the rules, but you can do it because this card said so, which technically goes against the traditional rules, but okay. One other example is conditions of summon. Is it crazy to anyone else that there are some cards which allow or enable you to summon X monster ignoring its summoning conditions? Like, is it crazy to anybody else? Though the standard rules are set in place, there's so many cards that just circumvent the rules and let you go against the law. Some may say that this is a good thing in that it helps to change the game up a bit and keeps things unique. And while I do agree to an extent, I'm just thinking about the first timer experience where the realization can be had and suddenly this game just seems a lot more messier to them. There's a lot of outside research that may have to be done for the beginner if they want to grasp the game better as a whole. On a bit of a different but similar note, I sometimes feel like new players are being sold a lie in the sense that the game is marketed in a way that's very simple and easy to understand. It's easy to normal summon, to exceed summon using two monsters of the same level and then use this card to power up or activate a cool effect that helps you and then pass turn. But when you actually start playing the game yourself, when you start attending locals and stuff and start trying to play the game a lot more seriously, it's an immediate reality check that there is so much more to this game than what was sold to me. In every structure deck, there's a little playmat included, which is neat, but no one really uses them, but that's besides the point. On the other side of these playmats are a couple of pointers on how to play your deck properly, as well as a flow chart to show you some really cool combo routes that you can utilize to help you win. I think these are cool, I genuinely do, but the reality is, a lot of the times, you're not even getting a chance to pull this stuff off. Of course, I'm not speaking for every single player out there, but this is the hard reality, unfortunately. What doesn't help this as well is the fact that the ratios in every structure deck are a little bit funny. I covered this in a previous video of what makes a good structure deck, which you should totally check out if you haven't already, but the really key cards that are included and needed to pull off most of these combos are included at one and just one copy, which can make it a little challenging to create these situations. So what I'm trying to say here is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is now a very complex game with all the additional rulings that a lot of players may not even know about. But of course, we don't raise problems unless we have some solutions to add. I think adding a segment on the website that can explain these additional rulings in a simple way would be very helpful. I know the basic rules and stuff are up on the website, but have an additional section to go over these more advanced rules that some players may not know about. Master Duel does a decent job of this already for new players, so do something similar for the TCG as well. The Master Duel Twitter and social media accounts also do these really neat master combo segments where they'll show you a really nice card combination that you can use, and though this may already be basic knowledge for the veteran players, this goes a long way for new users to find out more about some of the decks that they may want to play. Doing something similar for the TCG as well would be a good idea in addition to what we already have on these playmat tips. Beyond rulings and such, there's a few other issues that add to the complexity of Yu-Gi-Oh! Card design has been headed in a very funny direction. Cards and decks that are supposed to allow for more interaction are actually just quite one-sided. Huge boss monsters and powerful cards with crazy effects, though fine, are just way too easy to summon. We've already talked a little about the idea of archetype locking certain boss monsters because it's just insane that you see cards like Access Code Talker in every second deck. As a Code Talker player, it just makes sense that he's in my deck because he's our leader. But why am I facing off against him in my opponent's Kashtira deck? Why is he in a lot of Sky Striker decks? Why is he in Phantom Knights, in Dragon Link, in Terra Elements, in Fortune Ladies? Why is he in everything? Ain't it funny that Borreload Savage Dragon, another card that would also be seen in every other deck, doesn't take a single rocket card or anything like that to be made? But instead, nope, just one tuner and one non-tuner and you're good to go. And just like that, you have a giant Omni-Negate Borreload boss in a Dino deck. Now yes, I know and I get it. These cards are included in a lot of decks because they can be useful to the strategy and help a lot because they're so generic. And I'm not against creativity or whatever, but leaving decks to be so open to accessing these massive boss cards whose effects and conditions should be saved for specific archetypes can lead to this very problem. But also, I just feel like it should be so much harder to summon these guys than what it is. And though archetype locking may or may not be the answer, it's definitely a discussion that should be had. One of the main reasons that the new and returning players have when looking into this game is, why does this card just do so much? And I'm not here to say that you shouldn't be able to put these cards into every deck. We'll save this specific discussion for another video. But I just feel like it can take the identity of a deck away by ending on these boards of just big generic boss monsters that just negate or destroy everything, no matter what deck it is that you're playing or facing off against. And this is all before we get into things like hand traps and floodgates, which are a massive problem in the game because they can just turn off entire decks and take away that interaction that people want so much. This is for floodgate specifically. I don't know about you, but seeing a floodgate being flipped in tournament and doing just that, and the game now becoming this very one-sided one-player game is just the most boring thing ever. Hand traps too are cards that I feel have just gotten way too powerful for what they were supposed to be over time and are now, for a lot of people, are very essential and necessary inclusions in your decks if you want to last the games. These cards were supposed to be solutions to problems, but have become problems of their own as a result. While I don't think that hand traps killed Yu-Gi-Oh!, I can see the argument being made as to why they are a problem. I can sympathize with a lot of new players and a lot of people on the outside looking in from different card games when they say that the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just weird, unfun, toxic, or boring. Konami continues to print more powerful floodgates, more disruptions, and generic bosses that just stop or disrupt everything, and more oppressive cards in general that can make the game a little hard to navigate around once you wake up to the actual reality of what the game is. I love Yu-Gi-Oh! To death. It's my favorite card game of all time, and it's something that I've shared and expressed numerous times on here before. I don't want this to come off as yet another Yu-Gi Boomer rant, because that's really not what this video is or is supposed to be. The purpose of this video is to just bring light to a few of these things that are already being talked about within the community and offer some solutions to what can be done to help the game continue to do better and be better. There's a whole list of other things that I didn't get to go into, like pricing, which is still a big problem with Konami schemes to the English TCG. Like, dog, it should not cost this much to get essential cards still. And rarity bumping is such a scummy thing that needs to be talked about. Konami knows exactly what they're doing, and this is what helps to contribute to the cost of the game overall, and just take away from people's enjoyment of the game as well. This is a big topic that needs to be talked about, and we will in a future video. And things like the lack of alternative formats and how the game has advanced in a number of other negative ways These topics are all things that could be videos in themselves and probably will be at some point. But it's just no secret that the game has been struggling to maintain players. And that's not just coming from me and the other players that have already spoken up about this and all this other stuff, but now it's coming from the shareholders themselves. So you know that this is a big problem. Regardless though, there's still a reason why this continues to be one of my favorite things in the world, and why so many people love it for their own reasons too. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a great game, and we want it to be great and to continue to be great. So it's important that we have these discussions properly. But what do you guys think? What is it to you that can make this game so hard to get into or hard to stay with? What are some of the problems surrounding Yu-Gi-Oh! That you guys think either holds it back or doesn't make it fun to play? I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments, and let's really open up this discussion. I love making and doing these big discussion videos, so sound off on any other things that you'd like me to highlight in the future. Anyways guys, thanks so much again for checking out the video as always. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as I did making it, and I'll see you guys in the duel arena.